After a full year of home bartending, I felt that I was still kind of bad at making cocktails, and I was also not the party host, the cocktail party host that I really wanted to be. So I did something absolutely crazy. I threw 25 cocktail parties in a single year, and that not only completely changed my ability to make cocktails, my ability to host parties, but it also transformed my entire social life and my whole life in general. And in this video, I'll be sharing that exact story with you all. So let's imagine it's June 2021. I had made my first cocktail a year prior to that in June 2020. And in that first year of home bartending, I learned probably somewhere between 20 and 30 different recipes in terms of cocktails. And I'd also hosted about half a dozen cocktail parties. On top of that, I'd also, hosted date nights every now and then for the girl I was dating at the time. I had a few smaller parties with a few friends after work just to get together and vent about a busy week at work. And a lot of times I would have just like one or two friends come over and we would just hang out with a few drinks and things like that. So I had, really done a lot in terms of home bartending. I'd made quite a few cocktails. I learned quite a few recipes. I'd thrown a few parties and things like that. But I still felt that my cocktails were kind of mid. And I also felt that my ability to host parties was also still not where I wanted it to be. And that's when I was really at a crossroads. I was really deciding what I should do with this next year. And really, it's a rather interesting time, June 2021, for a couple of different reasons. One was the COVID-19 pandemic. So I started cocktail making home bartending in June 2020, so right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So a lot of the United States and the rest of the world were still in that, that first lockdown phase. They were still in that quarantine phase. Things weren't open. You weren't allowed to have big get-togethers. And home bartending is a naturally social hobby. Mixology is a naturally social hobby. You want to make cocktails for other people. I always say you can't really call yourself a home bartender unless you make cocktails for somebody else. But you weren't really allowed to have a lot of those social gatherings. That's why a lot of my parties were smaller. I would just have a lot of times just one or two other people that I was making cocktails for. So you weren't really allowed to have a lot of those big things. But by June 2021, a lot of the restrictions were starting to lift. People were starting to have like weddings and other big events. So it was only natural that you could start having bigger house parties as well. And on top of that, also after a cocktail party, there was also opportunities to go out, which did not exist during my first years of home bartending. There was really no places to go out. A lot of bars and lounges and clubs and things like that were closed. So after my parties, there's not really anything you could do afterwards. You usually stay at my parties until whatever time and then go home afterwards. So as the restrictions were ending, or not ending, but as the restrictions were, not as severe, there was a lot more opportunities in terms of things that you could do with home bartending, in terms of the size of the parties that you could host, in terms of what you could do after the party, and a lot of those different things. So really, home bartending started to open up the world. As the world started to open up, it felt like you could do a lot more with home bartending. And, so that's why that was such an interesting time. Another big thing was that I started my internal medicine residency in basically like June/July 2020. So I had just finished, I was just finishing up my first year as a resident. And for those of you that are not as familiar, residency, at least in America, is the busiest time of a doctor's entire career. And that's, even if my career, I'm only in my early 30s, but even if my career lasted like another 50 years, that would still be the busiest time. Residency will still be the busiest time. And specifically that very first year, it's the hardest transition. It's the busiest time overall of that residency. So I was, just finishing up my first year. I was just getting adjusted to I knew that was going to be the busiest year. I knew that year was going to be the hardest adjustment. I'd also moved to a new city, COVID-19, all these different things. So for a lot of different reasons, I felt like that year was the hardest year of my entire career. So I felt like, I was going into second year, things were going to be a lot, there were going to be new challenges, obviously, but I felt like the challenges were not going to be as bad. I would have a lot more time to devote to home bartending and things like that. And, so that's one of the other reasons. So, COVID-19 restrictions were ending. I felt like I was going to have more free time with my social life and things like that. Another big thing is that I was also starting to learn tiki at that time and starting to really push myself as a home bartender. So in a lot of different ways, I was trying to, I felt like I had the good foundation from my first year as a home bartender. And my second year, as a home bartender, I really wanted to experiment with a lot of different things. I wanted to try a lot of new cocktails. I wanted to, host a lot of themed parties. So I really wanted to try a lot more in terms of cocktails and in terms of hosting parties in my second year as a home bartender that I did not do in my first year. Because in my first year, I was really just learning the fundamentals. I was learning what tools to get. I was acquiring the tools. I was learning all the different techniques. I was learning some of the more core, essential, fundamental cocktail recipes, things like the old-fashioned martini, daiquiri, margarita, Moscow Mule, some of these more essential classic cocktails. I was really starting to learn all those different recipes. So I felt like I had a good base in terms of my first year. I wasn't the best at making cocktails. I wasn't the best at hosting parties, but I felt like I had a good base. I had built up a good amount of experience during my first year, and I really wanted to push myself in a lot of ways during my second year. And really, so those are like three of the most important reasons. COVID restrictions were ending or being lifted. I was going to have more time to devote to my social life because work was going to be less crazy, less busy. And I felt like I had a good foundation, a good base in terms of cocktail making and also in terms of hosting parties. And I really wanted to push myself a lot more in the coming year. And arguably the fourth reason, which is arguably the most important reason, is that I felt, at least in terms of my social life, there was going to be a new opportunity. In my residency program, there's different classes. It was a 3-year residency. So I felt like my year was really social. We were really well connected. The 2 years above us, I felt like that was not necessarily the case. But I was going from first year into my second year, the new class that was coming in to take that spot of that first year, I felt like that class was also like my class. They were also very well connected. They were very social. And not only were they very social and well connected with each other, there was a lot of good connections and a lot of good social interactions between my class and their class, a lot of amazing friendships. Even just next month, I have 2 really good friends in that class that came after me, and those 2 are getting married next month. I'm going to that wedding. So, like I said, this has changed my entire life. I have these amazing friendships, the kind of friendships where, I get invited to their weddings. I have these kind of friendships because of what I did hosting those 25 parties in a year. So that was really the biggest thing. We were getting this new incoming batch of people into our residency program that were also like my class. They were really social. They were really open to different things, open to coming to my parties. And because of that, they ended up becoming some of my closest friends, even to this day, several years later. Like I said, this was all June 2021, so nearly 5 years ago. And even now, to this day, some of those people are still some of my closest friends, both in my class and the class after me. So I just felt like that was a huge opportunity. And so I really wanted to push myself. So I made that decision in June 2020 that for the next year, June 2021 until June 2022, 12 months, full year, I was going to host 2 parties every single month. And there's actually 1 month where I hosted 3 parties. So that's why it ended up being 25 parties in a single year. And that completely changed everything. By hosting those 25 parties in a year, I got so much better at making cocktails. I got so much better at hosting parties. And not only that, it also completely changed my entire social life. And not only that, it changed my life in general. I have these amazing friendships with all those different people that came to those parties. And it just set me on this whole trajectory. I think if I didn't do that in that year, if I didn't throw those 25 parties in a year and really take my cocktails and my hosting skills and my home bartending overall in general from this level to this level, from like a 5 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10, I felt like if I didn't do that, I wouldn't really be where I am right now in terms of the friends that I have, in terms of the passion that I have for home bartending. I probably would have never even started this YouTube channel that you guys are all watching right now and enjoying right now. So in a lot of different ways, this really changed my life. That year where I felt like I had a good base in terms of home bartending, but I really wanted to level up. And when I made that decision, I was going to host 25 parties in a single year. That's what changed everything. Everything took off. My cocktail making took off. My party hosting skills took off. My social life took off. So everything really took off. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. The first is that, you just have so much sheer volume and quantity in terms of how much you're doing in terms of your cocktails. Let's say, for example, the average cocktail party had like 12 guests. The average person had, 2 cocktails, just for quick math. So that's approximately like 25 cocktails in a party. And every party that I'm hosting, I'm going to have 3 different cocktails on the menu. So after a single year of home bartending, 25 parties, that means every cocktail party has 3 different cocktails on the menu. So in that single year, I'm learning 75 different cocktail recipes. Also, I'm making approximately, 25 cocktails per party, and I hosted 25 parties. So just 25 by 25, that's 625. That's 625 different cocktails that I made in that year. And, that's just an approximation. There were actually quite a few parties where there were more people than that. There were oftentimes parties where people had 3 drinks on average. And on top of that, that doesn't even count all the times where, I was making cocktails on my own, experimenting, or, I just wanted to relax after a busy day at work and I would make a cocktail for myself. I would have 1 or 2 friends come over every now and then for some drinks. I would have these really small get-togethers. I would have, date nights with the girl that I was dating at the time. So a lot of different cases. I was making even more cocktails than that. 600 to 700 cocktails was probably just the amount that I made from the parties alone. But if you look at overall how many cocktails I made, probably like somewhere between 800 and 1,000 cocktails that I made just in that single year. So not only did I learn 75 different cocktail recipes, I made somewhere between 800 and 1,000 cocktails in just 1 year of home bartending. So you can imagine that even just by sheer volume, just by sets and reps, you're just getting so much volume in terms of how much cocktails you're learning, how many new cocktails you're learning, and how many total cocktails that you're making. And also, not only that, how many different types of people you're serving those cocktails to. Because all different types of people have different taste preferences. Some people like certain different flavor profiles, certain different liquors, certain different ingredients. So you're making cocktails for all these different people. That alone also will level you up as a home bartender. And on top of that, just hosting 25 different parties, that's oftentimes more parties than that can be more parties than a lot of people host in their entire lifetime. And I hosted that much in just 1 year. So you can tell that really just leveled up everything about me as a host. I became so much more hospitable. I, was better at attending to my guests. I was better at listening to my guests. I was better at, coming up with the music for my parties. I was better at coming up with the menus for my parties. I was better at coming up and preparing the ice and everything for my parties. I was better at cleaning up after my parties. I was better at preparing and getting the ingredients for my parties. I was better at hosting during the actual parties. So all those different aspects of hosting a party, the preparation, which includes, cleaning your apartment, preparing the ice, buying all the different ingredients, coming up with a menu, finding a theme for the party, sending out the invites, all those different aspects before the party, and then during the party, making sure all your guests are comfortable at the party, making sure everyone has drinks in a timely fashion, making sure the party is, quite orderly, you're not disrupting your neighbors, things like that. You're providing good music for the parties, you're providing good food for the parties, all these different aspects during the party, and then after the party, getting everyone out, getting everyone home in a safe fashion, cleaning up after the party, all these different things. I got so much better, so much more efficient at that just because I hosted so many different parties within a single year. So not only did I level up my skills in terms of actually just pure cocktail making, just straight up pure bartending, pure mixology, I also leveled up the other important aspect of home bartending, which is the hosting cocktail parties, which is having people over to your house. And like I said, it doesn't just have to be parties. It can be date nights. It can be small get-togethers. It can be game nights. It can be just one-on-one with somebody else, with a friend or a coworker or family member or something like that. Because I had done so much of that within that second year of home bartending, that really leveled up everything about me as a home bartender. And if you're finding yourself in a similar position to where I was in June 2021, where you feel like you've been making cocktails for a certain amount of time, you feel like your cocktails are okay, maybe they're kind of mid, maybe they're even bad. You feel like you've hosted one or two parties, you've hosted a few parties, you feel like your parties aren't amazing, they're not banger parties, they're not better parties than nightclubs, your drinks aren't better than the drinks that your friends get when they go out to cocktail bars. If you feel like that, something that you can really do if you really want to take your game from where I was, probably like a C or a D, I took my game all the way up to like an A+, A++. Something that I did, the most important thing that I did at that time was that I just hosted as many parties as I comfortably could. What that meant was that 2 parties a month, 25 parties in a single year. And that took my game in terms of everything, in terms of making cocktails, in terms of hosting parties. It took me from that, that average level where it's like, oh, his cocktails are kind of good, his parties are pretty fun, to no, after the end of the year, everyone that came to my party was like, those cocktails are better than the cocktails I get when I go out to cocktail bars, clubs, restaurants, bars, things like that. Those parties, they're more fun than nightclubs. They're more fun than the parties that you can go when you can go out. They're more fun than any bar. They're more fun than any lounge. They're more fun than any social event. That's the kind of thing that people were saying when they came to my parties. Not in June 2021, but a full year later in June 2022. That's the kind of thing that people were saying. That full year of hosting 25 parties in a single year, that's the kind of comments that you're going to get afterwards. You're going to get people saying, oh, these cocktails are better than any cocktail that I can get when I go out. These parties are more fun than any of the parties that I've ever been to. They're more fun than any nightclub, any bar, any lounge. Those are the kind of comments that you can get if you do something like what I did. Absolutely crazy, but it completely changed my cocktail making skills, completely changed my party hosting skills. Not only that, what's even more important, it completely transformed my social life and my whole life in general. And that's what hosting 25 parties in a single year did for me. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Like I said, if you really want to level up your skills, I would recommend that you do something crazy like that. Maybe you don't have to host 25 parties in a year, but host as many parties as you comfortably can. That will really take your home bartending game to the next level. Anyways, that's all I have for today's video. If you found the advice in this video helpful, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I like to do 2 styles of videos on this channel. The first will be like this one, where I share stories from my own journey, share tips and tricks, give general advice about home bartending, answer questions about home bartending, and all things like that I hope will help you guys become better home bartenders. The second style of video will be tutorials, where I show you guys how to make a specific cocktail. And finally, if you really want to take home bartending to the next level and you really want to be more serious and invest money into this journey, I actually have a paid community, and it'll be on school.com, and that'll be in the first link in the description below. Thank you. Cheers.